it kind of dawned on me. I was just like, wow, like if I took a quality of life scale on myself right now, what would that look like? We do that for our patients, but like we recognize in our pets, if they're no longer doing the things they love, that's a concerning sign.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined, where we talk about opportunities in veterinary medicine. And today we'll discuss a career you probably wouldn't have thought about in vet school, at least not yet, but that may fit a lot of your values and wants in work and life. I have Dr. Leanne Mathew, one of the nicest human beings on the planet and so full of life. She was a student at the University of Missouri when I was completing my nutrition residency. She'll talk about going into emergency medicine right out of vet school and her journey to today, where she is a veterinarian for Lap of Love Hospice and end-of-life care. She drives Lap of Love's veterinarian recruiting and training, and she serves as a mentor for veterinarians working at Lap of Love. So she's a great person to talk about this career path. And even if this isn't a career path for you, it's valuable to know that there are doctors in this space to provide more options for our pet families. I think you'll really enjoy this episode, so let's talk with Dr. Leanne Mathew. When did you know that you wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
This is the question I feel like everyone kind of asks us, right?
Yes.
I think I knew when I was a little girl, right? There was like this innate, unusual love for animals. I would say that I had. My family, interestingly enough, we did not have pets growing up.
Oh.
And so it was just something in which, with how busy, my siblings were and my parents, we were always on the go. And I constantly just found myself gravitating toward other people's pets and the animals in the neighborhood. So I was always a designated dog sitter or designated dog walker, or yes, of course, I'll go check on your cats. Or if I'm going out of town, can I go frolic with the cows in the pasture? So it's those types of things. I think early on were a little bit different comparative to my siblings. And I just always had such an interest in science and how the body works. And I think the drive to veterinary medicine versus human medicine, they're always innocent, right? They have that innate innocence that you just want to do what's best for them always. And that's how I felt, at least. And even just like growing up, I was like, okay, I can see myself being in this field. So pursue the dream, and here we are.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I'm curious. You said siblings, and before we hit record, you said your mom was a hard worker. So
Yeah.
how many siblings do you have?
I have an older sister and two younger brothers, the youngest of which he is in his senior year of high school. So we're the first three of us are clumped together. He was a surprise blessing for my family, we like to call him, but we wouldn't have it any other way. It's so fun to watch him grow and become an adult. And I would argue he's turned out better than the rest of us. So.
They practice on the three of you. No.
That's right. That's right.
And then your parent, you said again, you said your mom was a really hard worker. So what did your mom do or does?
Yes. She still practices. She's actually a physical therapist. And interestingly enough, she had worked in a hospital setting while I was growing up. And then she started her own clinic for a while and worked with a few other physical therapists. And now, interestingly enough, she does home visits.
Oh, okay. Well, for those who don't quite know the story yet, we're gonna come full circle here. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's really cool. Okay. So you got into vet school at the University of Missouri. So what was vet school like for you?
Oh gosh, it's funny thinking about this. And I think for all of us who go through vet school, those memories or lack thereof, because sometimes I feel like it's a black hole from all the information we were trying to cram into our brains. At vet school, it was a whirlwind. There's moments that I just absolutely loved it, and moments that I was just like, I cannot wait for this to be done. And I think it was interesting. I went to undergrad at the University of Missouri and then stayed there for vet school. So Mizzou had this unique 3+1 program within the animal science bachelor's degree, where if you completed your prerequisites for vet school, the required coursework for that animal science bachelor's, then you could sink that into 3 years. And after your first year of vet school, you would be granted your animal science bachelor's as well. So I did that 3+1 program, which was great because I got to cut out a year of schooling. However, my first year of vet school was taking place when all of my best friends were still living large their last year of undergrad. So that was a difficult adjustment, I think, for that first year of recognizing, okay, I don't get to be the social, person that I always was in undergrad because I really have to hunker down and study. And anatomy, I think my first semester of vet school was like the bane of my existence. I have more of a physiology brain. And so you ask any of my classmates, they can tell you that I did not enjoy going to the anatomy lab, but powered through. And I think whenever I got to clinicals, Mizzou is a little different, as you know. We have kind of the first 2 years are focused on the didactic portion, and then almost a full second 2 years are focused in the clinics. And the clinics is where I was just like, yes, like this is the good stuff. This is where I'm meant to be. And I'm a doer. So while I love learning by application is definitely what makes my brain and heart happy. So it felt good to reach that point and kind of just get to see my classmates in that setting as well.
Well, so did you know where you were interested in maybe going after you finished vet school? And did that kind of change throughout your time?
Yes, absolutely. So I grew up in a small town in Missouri, probably around 8,000 people or so. So all the veterinarians I had shadowed with growing up, they were the docs who did it all. Small animal, large animal. They would do occasional, ambulatory visits, especially for livestock. And so I had the vision of becoming a mixed animal practitioner when I entered vet school. But over time, as I recognized kind of what else was out there, I ended up gravitating toward emergency medicine. As I said, physiology, brain. So kind of those internal medicine cases that walked through the door that you initially get to stabilize and ensure that they make it through the night to the next day. Like those are the things that I really, really enjoyed, and just kind of making my brain work that way. So I worked a little bit as a technician, a triage technician, an ICU technician for Mizzou's ER department. And that kind of sealed the deal. I decided to pursue emergency medicine upon graduation. So,
So you worked as a technician while you were going through vet school?
yeah, yeah. So it was very modest hours. It was great because, thank goodness, because I needed to study. um, but they were very good about essentially you just picked up shifts as you could to fill in the gaps because, heaven knows that ERs are always in need of more help and more hands, right? And so just by being in that environment alone, not just as a student, but getting my hands dirty, right? Getting to work with the students that were on that rotation and the clinicians who were guiding them through that, I learned a lot. And it ended up translating really well into practice because I get to see all of that kind of theoretical didactic that we learned applied straight away. So, our ER rotation in vet school is about, I don't know, I think 2 weeks long, which is a snapshot, right?
Yeah.
But working as kind of that tech role helped to kind of build that foundation, I think.
Yeah. Well, into the real world you went, right into emergency medicine. What was the leap like?
Yes. So I was a very stubborn human being, student, if you will. And I really was resolute in wanting to try to enter emergency practice right after school rather than doing the internship route. And, I definitely got turned down by a lot of clinics who were looking for an intern trained ER doctor, which completely understandable. Like there's a huge amount of experience that comes with that. And so I applied to places, I would say all over the country. I was really looking to move somewhere that was much warmer than Missouri, as you can probably attest to the
Yeah.
cold winters up there. And so I actually had applied to a couple Blue Pearls as well. And they accepted me for kind of what I would consider like an ER boot camp. And if I remember this correctly, I was a bit of a guinea pig for their current emerge program that they have for either new graduates or doctors looking to enter ER if they haven't practiced in that space before. So I had, thankfully, like amazing mentorship, especially the first kind of 3 or 4 months after I walked into the ER field. And so I always had an experienced doctor who was present on shifts with me those first 3 or 4 months to bounce ideas off of, consult with on cases. And thankfully, gained a lot of momentum with kind of my comfort level and confidence with those cases within that time frame. And so it was a bit hectic, as you can imagine, but it was nice in those first several months because I wasn't thrust into the 30 cases a shift type scenario that I think a lot of ER doctors are used to. I was seeing maybe like 10 to 15 initially, and then gradually building up to that normal caseload. So don't get me wrong, the first year was tough, especially when I transitioned to being fully by myself overnights. As a person who was less than a year out of school, that was a little bit daunting at times. And we always talk about imposter syndrome, right? That was very much present. However, goodness sakes, like what an amazing place to learn. And thankfully, I had a lot of colleagues, specialists as well, who I could really bounce ideas off of or call in the middle of the night if worst came to worst because they were on call. So I had a lot of support, I think, which made that experience possible. So
Yeah.
anyway, it was a good one for sure.
Yeah, no, I think this is interesting because so you graduated vet school in 2017, and then that was actually the time I wrapped up my residency at the University of Missouri. But in 2017, this was pre-pandemic, and I guess I'm trying to remember back to kind of the economy of getting a job because
Mm.
if vet students are listening to this right now, or maybe who graduated in the past couple of years, they're like, "Man, you walk down the street and they'll hire you," right?
Right,
So,
right.
I mean, there people were going to second and third year vet students and already trying to offer them jobs. So it was a little bit different, and you can kind of see how quickly things changed. But just kind of taking that into account when you are trying to decide your next step. Sometimes just looking at the environment around you and what fits your needs at the time. I was one who did the internship and
Yeah.
was able to get great mentorship while I was very much a baby doctor at the time. And there are some other programs similar to what you were describing. I think the Veterinary Emergency Group has a great
Yes.
program to kind of train up, whether it's if you're right out of school, or I had a colleague who had been out of clinics for a few years and wanted to go back into emergency medicine so she could participate in that, so she could get some refreshers before she just got plunged onto the clinic
Yes.
floor. So I think those are great. I think we've got a lot of different opportunities now. So 2 years of emergency, you were living your vet school dream of what you thought you were going to do. What happened? Why did you transition into something in my mind is very different, but I'm
Yeah.
waiting to hear how it was. So what was the transition for you?
Very good question. So, I think it's funny, right? We are, bright-eyed and just so hopeful when we graduate vet school and so excited, right, for this career path that we have chosen, and we should be. And sometimes when we get out in the real world, it doesn't always meet your expectations as to what you envisioned. And don't get me wrong, as I said, entering ER, working in that hospital for 2 years, like what a fantastic place to learn and build just a medicine foundation. And I had so much support in that space. I found over time in that setting, the schedule and just the long hours, kind of the bouncing back and forth between night, day, swing, and just the difficulty of slowing down at all, right? I was not able to be the person or the veterinarian I wanted to be. And so I kind of had a, I don't know if it was like a single moment epiphany, but it was just like a gradual over time recognition of I am not who I want to be. This is not the life I envisioned for myself. And it's not something that I found to be sustainable to reach kind of my ultimate goals, even outside of veterinary medicine. So I recognize that. And for me, like I'd always valued being a very active person, someone who enjoyed being outdoors and being healthy. And I used to read for enjoyment and play the piano and do all those things. And I was no longer doing the things I loved in that space. And it kind of dawned on me. I was just like, wow, like if I took a quality of life scale on myself right now, what would that look like? Right? We do that for our patients, but like we recognize in our pets, if they're no longer doing the things they love, that's a concerning sign. Right. And so I ultimately decided, okay, I need to pursue another avenue of medicine that enables me to be the human being, not just doctor, but also human being that I wanted to be. So I found that in the ER space, the appointments in which I cherished the most or felt kind of my heart was fullest was when I was able to really slow down and be present with a family to dive into their pet's quality of life and figuring out the best course of action, especially if I had just presented them with difficult news. And even guiding a family through the end of life experience, just ensuring that I was fully present for them and making that as peaceful as possible was so important, despite the chaos of what was happening on the treatment floor. Right. So I kind of just hooked onto that. And I had known about Lap of Love since vet school. Our founder, Dr. Janie McBeady, she had spoken at VBMA events that I was involved in through vet school. And so I always kept it in the back of my mind. And I was like, you know what, let's reach out to them and see what's going on and see if they might have an opportunity. So I did. And I was in San Antonio at the time when I was working ER, but Lap of Love had an opening in Houston at that point in time. And so I went ahead and said, you know what, I'm going to take the plunge and see how this works, like focusing in on, the types of appointments that made my heart full. And I moved by myself to Houston and got started in my current field, end of life care. And here I am 4 years later, and it's been a great place.
We had this conversation. So one of the reasons that I kind of got the push to reach out and invite you was me actually listening to multiple people have a conversation, and they made the comment that they had witnessed many times where euthanasias were kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to burnout, and veterinarians just kind of saying, okay, I can't do this anymore. And so I was like, well, goodness, Lap of Love, there are people who do this all the time. This is what they do. And you even said, that's one of the big questions that you get is how do you do end of life all the time? Now, it sounds like you may have identified already early that there was something special about that moment. But can you speak to that where, what is different about what Lap of Love does, or maybe some of these other companies that focus more on the hospice care of animals?
Yes. And I think end of life care, euthanasia decisions, so much of what is important is the circumstances and how that care is provided. Completely different experience helping a family in the home comparative to even when I was doing that type of appointment in the clinic setting. The clinic setting, I think, we've made huge advances as to how comfortable we can help our patients and clients to be really going out of our way to ensure that process is going to be peaceful, with comfort rooms, trying to create that in like that homey experience a lot of times, and keeping them separate from the rest of the clinic if possible. But it's not the same. It's not the same as seeing the pet in their home environment on their own bed, even the family being more comfortable in their personal space. And I think for us as a veterinarian, we can recognize that. We can recognize that, our patients and the people, they're just more themselves in their own space. They're getting to just fully focus on the matter at hand, their loved one. And likewise, we as the doctor, we're not trying to balance the 20 plus things waiting for us outside that exam room when we are doing in-home care, right? It's kind of with how our schedules are designed and kind of the nature of at least mobile work within Lap of Love. We have time to really just spend with pets and their people. And it's a little bit different as well. Most of the families that we're working with in this space, they have already spoken to another veterinarian about what's going on with their pet. They have already begun to accept that the pet is in their final days. And so we, as the doctor, we're not presenting new information to them necessarily. We get to be the angel that gives their loved one peace in that space. Whereas a lot of times in the clinic setting, especially ER, unfortunately, I was very commonly the bearer of bad news. The person who unfortunately told them that their loved one had a poor or even potentially terminal diagnosis, and trying to work through that is very difficult, especially if it's a very quick progression of diagnosis, euthanasia. So I think we have the luxury and the benefit with these in-home appointments. Families are able to wrap their hearts and minds around this decision and what's going on with their pet. And we, as the doctors, we get to come into a space that they are most comfortable in and helping them with, yes, one of the most difficult decisions they're ever having to make. But you, in this space, you get to witness love between pets and their people every appointment. And I could not say that about every environment I've been in within vet medicine. So I think looking at the greater picture and recognizing, like while this decision is so difficult, like so many of my appointments, families would walk me through their pet's life, sharing their favorite memories. I even had a family like create a whole slideshow that we spent the first 10 minutes of the appointment just viewing and appreciating the love and life that was shared with their pet. And I mean, that's the good stuff. That is, that relationship, that love is why I went to vet school. And I think that is the case for a lot of us. So it's the environment and the circumstances, I think, in which euthanasia is performed make so much of a difference as to how it sticks with us and how we can walk away from that experience.
I think that's such a great observation. When I look back on my internship, which quite a bit of it was emergency, what I do actually remember, because like you said, it was blur. That one year was a blur. But what I remember were actually some of the harder moments of, the weekend where it felt like I euthanized everything, or the moment where we did go into one of those, the quiet room where a veteran, I helped, euthanize his dog. We were on the floor with the dog, and he, looks at me and says, I have gone through war, and this is when I'm going to break down. And seeing him, tear up over his dog. So that moment, it sticks with me because of that love. Absolutely. But they are really hard situations. And so
Yes.
I think, one, it's so wonderful to know that if you do get a case where they can take their dog home and this works for them, you can set them up with a hospice care veterinary team so
Yeah.
that you, as the doctor, that yes, we did what we do. We're problem solvers. We found the problem and then we had to give the news, but we have
Right.
options, right? So maybe there might be those situations where we have the option to say, there's a hospice care team that you can actually work with and take a little extra time to think about it and
Yes.
be with your dog, even if it's another week. I don't know, but at least you give them more options than here's a bill for $5,000 or we
Right.
could do this. Of course, the flip side of it, where I think can be really hard on people, are the ones where there are money situations where
Yes.
so those are really hard for veterinarians because we know the problem usually and we have a solution, but the other side can't do that solution. And I think that's really hard. Just out of curiosity, my assumption is that there are some higher financial requirements of working with a hospice care because you're taking more time, you're going to the home, so there's transportation.
Right.
In general, is it a little more expensive? And are there ways to kind of maybe address that as well to make it even more accessible?
Yes. No, that's a really good question. I would say, like, across the country, overall, yes, our service is probably more expensive than if a family would go to the clinic setting or a shelter setting to euthanize their pet or even have kind of more of like a quality of life consultation. So it's interesting doing this work. I had families I was helping going into their homes and, assessing kind of your surroundings, people of all sorts of financial backgrounds within this work, which you wouldn't always expect because it is a higher price point. However, I think a lot of families, they place so much value on being able to have that peaceful goodbye that even if they did not necessarily have the money to pursue that few $1,000 surgery that I may have quoted them the night before in the ER setting, every family member might be able to pitch in $50 here, maybe 75 there to be able to provide this in-home service of a goodbye. And Lap of Love, I know we accept care credit as well. If a family wanted to utilize that resource, it's not done necessarily very often, but sometimes we will split payments up for families if there is the need there. And we also have an angel fund. We doctors within Lap of Love, we are able to gift a charity appointment every so often to families if we deem to do so, which is really, it's so gratifying to be able to do that and recognizing that it's just the generosity of other families has enabled you to do that. So we'll have clients that we help who will donate to our angel fund to help families who may not otherwise be able to provide this type of service to their loved ones. So there's a lot of different options there, and it's difficult. I think, as you said, you mentioned, right, a lot of times finances prevent us from providing a solution to these pets and their families. And something I kind of came to recognize over time, like a lot, some of these diagnoses are fixable with that one procedure or with this, like maybe this single treatment over the next several days. But a lot of times it's not the only thing that's happening, right? And that pet, they're going to be encountering all sorts of other issues over the span of their life. And so, if I ever had a family who we diagnosed diabetes in their cat, and they recognized that maybe financially they couldn't afford it, or even physically could not administer insulin to their cat at home type scenarios. It's those types of things that I think not just evaluating the pet, but also seeing the people that are attached to them, that I think helped me kind of come to terms with different decisions I've made in a clinical setting or even with Lap of Love, and recognizing, okay, like what's the big picture here? And it's, you know, saying goodbye is not always the answer, right? It's right. We know as veterinarians, we have so many treatment plans and options out there these days. But I guess something I've come to learn working with Lap of Love is that if someone is pursuing euthanasia, and especially with the families we're able to work with in this space, it's not something they've taken lightly. Something that we're asked a lot, actually, when I talk with doctors who are interested in exploring with us, they ask if we see convenience euthanasias very often. And interestingly enough, I saw way more scenarios I would categorize under that umbrella that were kind of questionable in the ER setting rather than the setting within Lap of Love. And I think people who are seeking to have that experience at home, they tend to be some of the families who see their pets as part of their family, and they really want to do what's best by them, even if they can't afford standard of care treatment plan. So even if it's not the medically best option, it may be the kindest option that we are able to provide to them, given the circumstances. So it's tough. We all function with different moral compasses when we approach this conversation. And I think the most important thing is, are you able to sleep with yourself at night with the decisions you make, right? And is it good quality sleep too?
Yes.
Right.
While we were talking, it kind of dawned on me that you joined Lap of Love, I think, right before the pandemic.
Yep.
So, I mean, that was a time when, going into someone else's home might be a little terrifying. So,
Yeah.
what was that time like for doctors that were like their bread and butter is going into other people's homes?
Yes. Yes. So it was a time of uncertainty, I think, for everyone in vet medicine, but same thing for our team. Like doctors were just not sure how to best approach these cases. And I think the nice thing is actually in the home setting, as long as the weather allowed, we were able to conduct a lot of these appointments outside and still kind of, at least with like actual euthanasia appointments, still practice social distancing. A lot of times, the pets that we're seeing in this space, like it's very obvious that they are in their final days. And so they may not be very mobile. And so that did enable us to kind of direct the appointment in a way that all parties could be safe. And I know all of us doctors were always masking up going into families' homes. And it was, I think, a difficult time for everyone, regardless of the environment that you were in. But there are a lot of things that our doctors, because of the different environments we're walking into, we had a lot of creativity figuring out, right? Like, how can we best conduct these appointments to ensure that it's still going to be peaceful and personal for everybody, but also keep the humans safe. And so I think for a lot of us, the hugs were very, very limited during that high kind of infection period. And if you know Lap of Love doctors, or if you've had an appointment with one, usually a hug is present at the end of every appointment if the family is comfortable with it, just because it's such a vulnerable and difficult time. So I think for a lot of us, that was a difficult point for sure, is not being able to give that kind of that comfort to folks when we walked away. But it was nice because I, like, in this space, actually ended up interacting with a lower number of people than if I were in the clinic setting and still seeing the same volume of cases, had my team around me. So most of our doctors are seeing 3, maybe 4 appointments a day if they're in a busy area. And so it's a little different, I would say, exposure in that regard too.
But the interactions that you have are strong.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
right. So, I mean, even if you're a people person, I can see that, you get a lot of quality, interactions with individuals because you get to see people often at their most vulnerable time
Yes.
and support them through that.
For a lot of us who are missing interaction with people in that time, it was still nice to be able to physically see those families. And like, it was different, right? Because so much of communication is body language. It was different functioning with a mask on and trying to kind of build that trust innately with a family. And so obviously so much goes into our overall body, not just your mouth and this area, but conveying compassion and kindness. It was different, right? And amidst sometimes snotting and tears if the family was right. So not always a great scenario in the family circumstances, but it was thankfully, as I said, we were able to get very creative, and it was the families were so grateful that they were still able to do this during the pandemic, because I know so many clinics were so swamped and so busy and trying to figure out how they themselves could safely navigate this, serving the community and protecting their staff, that I know there were a lot of families who called us at the time. Who told us they couldn't get in, even for like euthanasia appointments, they could not get in. So it was a difficult time, I think, for everyone, for sure. But I know that there was so much gratitude, and even from the referring community, of recognizing that this was still an option for patients and clients.
Yeah. Now you are helping people with their careers into this field. And so I'm sure you
Mhm.
get a lot of different questions. I brought up a few that we've talked about, but I mean, if you had to speak to this as a career path, what are the common questions that you get, and what are you kind of seeing as, choosing this as a veterinary career? And I'm assuming you have veterinarians and vet techs as well.
Very good question. So we actually we don't have technicians who accompany us in the home, which that was something that I was quite worried about when I explored with Lap of Love, because was blessed in the ER, especially hospital that I worked in. I, I had very skilled technical staff and talented, and so even my own venipuncture skills were a bit rusty at that point, because our doctors, that was not what our role in that clinic. Our technicians were far better than we were. So eh, I would say it's interesting you say that. That's actually a very common question is, do you have a technician accompany you? And it's not that technicians are, as I said, very skilled and talented. And I think that they play an integral role in the practice setting for these particular appointments, kind of with how we approach them medically, and even just our patient population. I would say that one person is really all that's needed. So, something that's a little bit different about our process in the home, I was always accustomed to euthanizing patients by placing an indwelling IV catheter, propofol, and then euthanasia solution. And typically taking the pet to the back to place that IV catheter, bringing them in back with the family so they could share time together before we actually help them say goodbye. With Lap of Love, it's a bit different. So we're typically giving, if euthanasia is considered the best course of action in that appointment, we'll typically administer an IM or sub-Q cocktail to our patients and incorporate anesthetics, analgesics, sedatives within that, and give the pet the time they need to reach cloud nine, a good anesthetic depth, right? And then once they're ready, we'll euthanize via a butterfly catheter and have tourniquets to help facilitate that. So the kind of struggling to tape in that IV catheter or shaving or things like that, it just becomes unnecessary. And the patients themselves, right, they're all in their final days. So the matter of kind of restraint is not necessarily as relevant. And also these pets are much more relaxed in their home environment. So we have kind of all those benefits for us functioning solo, and also the element of time. So I think our doctors as a whole are big fans of incorporating fear-free practices into how we approach these appointments, because we have the element of time to our benefit, and honing in on that appointment and making it as peaceful as possible for the pet and their family. But that is a very common question that we get about technicians. And we have, I would say as well, like, how are your doctors prepared to do this work, right? Because providing care in the home is very different than being in the clinic setting. I think in the clinic, we do a really good job of trying to, the scientists that we are, we try to eliminate as many variables as possible, right? And focus in on, okay, these are our processes for efficiency and achieving our desired results. In the home setting, you're a little bit more subjected to your environment and being adaptable there. So for all of our doctors who join, we have a very like clearly designed training program, if you will, that helps prepare them for what this in-home work is like and helps really, I think, their gears to start working, starting to think outside the box about how I can approach this care solo, right? The different kind of approaches I may take for each of my patients, medical considerations, even evaluating. We all have our spiels, right, for different disease processes or, appointment types, kind of evaluating that and figuring out how can I adjust this to better suit my environment and the circumstances at hand with in-home care. So we also get to ride along with colleagues before we get started. Seeing that firsthand, witnessing a peer conduct these appointments and how they navigate each interaction with the pets and their families, it's very eye-opening. I don't know about you, like, can you think of a time in your, post vet school career that you witnessed another veterinarian conducting a euthanasia?
Oh, goodness. Not that I can specifically remember. No.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting concept. Like we are so, sometimes we'll help each other out with surgeries, different patients maybe in the back, et cetera. But it's very rare, I think, for us to shadow a colleague in an exam room or be present with a veterinarian and kind of witness how they conduct a euthanasia appointment. So that training, I think, ends up being really helpful because it is a big jump from in clinic work to being in the home and functioning solo. That's, I would say, the more common questions about kind of the content of our day. Of course, a lot of people always have questions about schedule and compensation benefits, things like that, just like with any other position. But I would say those are the big ones that I would hear about.
So I have one for you. We
Yeah.
talked about you're not around as many people because you don't have as many appointments. However, you said you don't ride along with technicians.
Mhm.
So maybe unless you're doing a ride along with another colleague who's training, it sounds like you may not have as much interaction with colleagues either. So, I mean, maybe this question sounds so funny, but it's like, do you get lonely or do you miss interactions with colleagues? And if that does happen, like how is that addressed?
Yes. No, and it's a really good question. That's something I think, especially doctors who are either extroverts or they still relish that team environment, that in-person team. That's something that it is worth kind of evaluating and recognizing what environment you would excel in. I would say, like, occasionally I would miss having that in-person camaraderie. However, even though we're all working very independently, I would text my colleague in the area all the time, chatting about different cases. We would make it a priority to meet up for lunch once a month. And so there's definitely ways to still engage with one another. And it's also too one of those things in which don't get me wrong, I loved my veterinary team in the clinic space, but we all have our kind of like friend group even outside the clinic and our loved ones that, we always would choose to spend our time with. So I found that this job enabled me to have more time for that population of people, which filled a different kind of cup inside of me, if you will. I was just like, I get to be with, my loved ones more. And yeah, don't get me wrong. I occasionally miss having, that collegiality, camaraderie, whatever you want to call it, with in-person teammates. But within Lap of Love, we have a lot of engagement between our doctors as well, either through, we have a Facebook group that all of us can be a part of. We have different kind of happy hours that we'll organize every so often that people can join if they choose. So it's different type of interaction, but I would say my cup was full in different ways and it ended up being a really good fit. So I think a lot of doctors who work with us, they kind of they end up enjoying the independent aspect of it. And you kind of just have this different degree of autonomy when you are not overseeing a team or managing other folks. And I would say something that kind of gave me peace of mind just innately is I was solely responsible for my own actions and recognizing, okay, what was I doing in each appointment? And, oh, did I do that? Oh, yep. Yeah, still need to do that task type scenario. So I think it was probably easier on my brain in that regard, which was nice because then I had much more energy for post work hours with my loved ones. And that was something that I really have come to value.
Yeah. Oh, what a good perspective. So did you pick up your piano and your
Yes,
your
yes, yes. So oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite social events I do now. I have a monthly book club I'm a part of. And we're such nerds. We love like fantasy, like Lord of the Rings type adventure stories. And so we will branch out from different genres once in a while. But I started reading for enjoyment again. I don't know if you can see it, probably blurred out. That's my keyboard right there.
Okay.
And so like if I need a break in a day or I need to kind of have that creative side of my brain get pumped up, I'll just take a few minutes and tinker on the piano. I've actually started going to the gym again consistently, which is so many happy things come from that. Like I consistently work out every morning and get those good endorphins. And I something that I didn't know I enjoyed that I just started doing, I actually love to cook. So in recent years, I like branching into different cuisine styles and figuring out, okay, how can I create healthy homemade meals for my family and getting a little bit into the weeds with that, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. So yes, I feel like going back to kind of what we talked about earlier, I feel like I still becoming, but I am the person I want to be. And I think that this job, this transition of my focus and even schedule differences have really enabled me to do that.
Yeah. Well, you probably get a lot of people who are also burnt out and all sorts of things.
Yes.
And I'm sure you hear about what goes on in the veterinary world and things. So I'm just curious, like what would be your bigger, piece of wisdom that you would offer to people in our industry?
Oh gosh. Okay, so this is super cheesy, but I think fellow millennials out there will probably appreciate this. So this was something that kind of was just like going on repeat in my brain when I was considering making a career transition from ER to where I am now. The Switch Fit song, This Is Your Life. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, yep.
Yep. Okay, throwing it back a little bit. But something they ask in that song, are you who you want to be? And like I talked about that a little bit already, but and there's a reason because that just like kept on replaying over and over in my brain. And so I guess like the wisdom I can give to people is be bold, be brave, like pursue the person you want to become. And if you recognize that your working environment or the current space that you're in is not conducive to helping you live out the life that you desire and be the person you want to be, then don't be afraid to make a change. Change is hard. It's really hard and it's scary, right? I had the luxury of being a single person at the time that I made this transition from ER to working with Lap of Love. And so I know with change, there's a lot of responsibility and risk that comes with that. But there can also be some really great rewards. And life is short. Don't be afraid to pursue the person who you want to be.
I hope you loved this conversation as much as I did with Dr. Mathew. As always, I put resources in the show notes for you. Lap of Love attends many different veterinary conferences, including the rapidly approaching VMX in January. So stop by and say hello. Let them know you heard this episode on Vet Life Reimagined. And I'll be at VMX too. So reach out and let me know if you'll be there. That would make my day. If you would like to support what we do here at Vet Life Reimagined, please hit that follow on your podcast app. Share with a friend, visit our website, vetlifereimagined.com, and visit us on YouTube. There are so many ways. And I'm building out my 2024 plans. So if you have a guest or topic you'd like to hear on the podcast, please let me know. I want to make the podcast better and better for you. So be back here next week. I have a very different veterinary career path for you, and you won't want to miss it. So until next time.